We are live. Well, hey, friends. We are live on Hot Thoughts Volume 5. We're going to be talking about race in the gospel. And so we have kind of the plan where we just wait for people to arrive. And so while we do that, why don't we just kind of check in? Reshaunda, what do you got going on in your life so far?
Well, that's a great question. I got a lot going on, but I definitely tell you that I'm blessed to be able to just live in what I do for a living and make change in the world. So just as a quick, for those who don't know me out there, I essentially use my profession as a dietitian to help people in their wellness journey in their lives. And so what I do with that profession is I work with people individually. I utilize media to create influences as far as television and podcasting. I also authored a book and I did a TED Talk last year. So I got a lot of moving pieces, but it just shows you just kind of like how that passion has kind of turned into more, it's catching fire. And so I'm happy to be, also, I know Danny, he was my pastor at the gathering. So I go to the gathering here in St. Louis. And I'm all about wellness, loving self, and taking care of your body with nutrition. So that's kind of my spiel.
Yeah, you even go to the gathering after I left, so you must really like it. So
I kind of
do. All right, Kelly, what do you got going on?
Yeah, so I met Danny. We pastored together at the gathering. So I'm also a pastor. Currently heading back into North City. So I'm going to North City to plant a brand new church there. Very passionate about urban church planning and community development, which is within our areas of economic disparity. So those are some of the things that I'm working on. Also, very entrepreneurial. So I owned a fitness center here in St. Louis, in South City specifically, for 12 years prior to coming to the gathering. And so now that I'm going back into urban planting, because that does not necessarily come along with a salary right away, I'm going to tap back into my entrepreneurial skills and go back to doing some virtual fitness training and also doing some coaching and counseling. So that's what I've got going on.
Yeah, awesome. Cool. Aaron, what do you got going on, man?
So my name is Aaron, Aaron Layton, and I work with Danny's wife, Annie, at Westminister Christian Academy. I've been there for 12 years. Serve as the director of diversity there, have been for some time. Also wrote a book called Dear White Christian, What Every White Christian Needs to Know About How Black Christians See, View, and Experience Racism in America. And I have an agency that I founded back in 2014 called Relate to Color, which is a Christian diversity consulting agency. So just happy to be part of the conversation.
Cool. Thanks, Aaron. No, what about you?
Yeah, my name is Noah Hormann. I'm a pastor in urban St. Paul, Minnesota. Planning a church called Last City Church. And I'm bivocational. So I spend part of my time working kind of in the business world. I work for a company called Asmodee, which creates games like Catan and Ticket to Ride, and do logistics and process improvement for them, which is so exciting. Let me tell you how exciting that is. And I also I teach and coach and train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I build guitars. So I have various interests outside of getting my butt kicked in ministry.
Yeah, you get your butt kicked in multiple places now. That's great.
On the regular.
Or kick butts in other places. I don't know. So
sometimes.
There you go. Hakeem, how about you wrap us up?
My name's Hakeem Valles. I'm a retired NFL tight end. Actually making a comeback this upcoming season. Lifelong entrepreneur. I invest in real estate and the cannabis space. And I just recently founded 9 months ago a digital media agency. We focus on podcast production. But cool. Super happy to be here.
Yeah. Well, I am just honored that all of you would come on my my silly little show and do this, but also try to have just kind of important conversations. And I think last week I did volume 4 of this. And so we've been doing this is now the 5th week, and it started as kind of my creative outlet, just a way in COVID to be able to kind of connect with people when it felt like we were all spread out. And last week I just felt this like really interesting and really kind of important urge to say, like, this show, if we can do anything to like have important conversations about things that are happening, in our world. And so I thought that I would reach out to people I knew and people that I trusted. I knew that people that were just interested in having a conversation about just kind of what's happening in our country. And I know my wife and I have been diving in over the last several weeks into kind of podcasts and books and just kind of realizing that like we haven't even like scratched the surface of what like racism and race and all of that is like in our country. And I think we would have said we were advocates, but one thing we've realized is there's a lot more work to be done. And my hope is that a conversation with all of us can hopefully, for people that are looking to dip a toe into kind of having their eyes open to have a conversation to see what it's like. I know that I am at the forefront of kind of just needing to learn as well. And so my hope was just to dive into this conversation just kind of with each and every one of you. And so for the people that haven't ever joined us, what we usually do is we go through 5 questions and 5 wings, and we'll take a bite of a wing and we'll talk about it. And I think we might not all have wings, but we all have something to bite or sip on as we're diving into this. And so with that, I just kind of want to say, let's take a bite of our first wing. And then Reshaunda, I'm just going to toss the first question to you. And we kind of go in real quick tonight. But in this kind of season that we've been in, there's been stories like Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and with Amy Cooper in Central Park and all the things that we've kind of seen in the media over the last weeks and months and even years. And I just wonder, like specifically in the last months, as these things have kind of come to the forefront of media's attention, just how you have kind of processed those. And we'll all answer that question, but kind of where you are, like how have you processed that? Like what emotions have stirred? Like what has that been like kind of seeing those stories come to the forefront of kind of mainstream media?
Well, do you want me to eat my hot? So I have hot veggie fries.
Yeah, I love that. Take a hot veggie fry.
I'm gonna take my hot veggie fry.
Yeah.
And then speak upon your question.
I have almost meat from 7-Eleven, so your veggie fries are better than mine. So.
And you bought it. Okay.
I didn't buy it.
Really, what about? Well, you know, it's a topic between being surprised and then not so surprised. I would definitely say, thank God that we have technology now, so where these things can be captured and they can be exposed and they can be revealed for what they are versus typical stories. We wouldn't have never heard of these stories if we didn't have technology. We would have read it in a paper. Right. It would have been perhaps skewed, but we wouldn't have known the reality of what really happened. For our world, it's kind of like a perfect storm. For our world to come to this head after watching the video of George Floyd, I think it just sums up all the way that, you know, Black people have been treated over the years, how, you know, when we hear of a Black person getting killed or shot or whatever, it's just, something, they must have done something. And that video clearly showed you that this is what's happening, not to just a Black person, but to a human being. And so when you that right there surrounded by, a month before was the Ahmaud Arbery, a month before that was Breonna Taylor, you know, and then simultaneously almost was the Amy Cooper. It's like so many things are hidden at the same time, but it just finding its way to kind of create that head. So my first thing was, I'm glad there's technology now, because at least now people can see it for what it is and what it looks like. And we all feel that humanness of it when you're watching those videos. No one can look at those videos and not either be disgusted, not be sick to their stomach, or not just nod their head saying, yep, that's what happened. So it's kind of a mixture of different feelings when I watch all of those different things.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Anyone else want to kind of jump in? Just kind of what kind of hit you as those popped in to your kind of sphere as you saw them?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think for me, particularly Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd, I live in a predominantly white neighborhood, and I used to get up and run through that neighborhood early in the morning. And this was back 2013, 2014. It was even before Michael Brown. And so I had this fear of being ambushed. I had a fear of somebody seeing me and not wanting me in the neighborhood. And it'd be in the early morning, so it often was dark. And I had worked out strategies in my mind from being ambushed. And so I had visions in my mind of what I would do. And so when I saw the Ahmaud Arbery video, it was just really chilling to me because I saw that play out before. The only difference was it was in the early morning hours and it was dark. But I remember, like, I wouldn't always share that with some of my white friends because I think they would think that nothing like that could happen. But for some that I did share, they wouldn't say it, but I knew in the back of their mind, they were like, like, Aaron, you're just overthinking this type of stuff wouldn't happen. But I actually had these strategies of what I would do. In the neighborhood that I ran through, there's like a median in the middle to divide. And so I would run towards traffic. And if I saw a car coming, I'd shift to the other side. And if a car was coming behind, coming the other way, I would stop and make sure the car passed. So I had these strategies out. So to see that, and then the other image that I have in my mind was with the George Floyd is my son, who's 20 now. And, I just, one day and this was before George Floyd, I had the realization that a police officer could stop my son. He could pull him out of the car and he could, just like that, he could throw him to the ground, cuff him, and put his knees in the back of his neck. And I had that in my mind before this even happened. So for me, seeing George Floyd and the Ahmaud Arbery, I mean, it was hard to even process. And, I'm just like that, and so, just to, be in spaces with some of my white friends and say, no one, you can't tell me that can't happen because it just did. And so, So I was kind of, kind of all over the place. That just deep sadness too, a lot of the time. So,
yeah.
So, you're gonna add on? Go ahead, Kelly.
Oh no, just kind of piggybacking off of both of you all, Reshaunda, specifically thinking about technology and how many cases we've seen over the last several years now, just because of cell phone videos. But what it does for me is it makes me think how many more cases are out there that we've not seen, right? How many people have been killed or have been harassed? Even thinking about our institutional, the prison systems, how many people are in prison right now and they're not getting the same media attention that maybe a Kanye West would bring to a situation, or a Jay-Z, or a Kim Kardashian. And I'm just thinking about this systemically. There's more that we don't know about than what we do know about. And then I'm thinking about the the kind of how we're desensitized to this. It's become a thing where it's happening so frequent and so often that, we're rattled, but not rattled enough until we literally see live footage of someone being murdered. And then you think about even seeing it on film. There's still not, it doesn't mean necessarily that it's going to be carried out into a trial. It doesn't mean that the people will be convicted. There are so many loopholes with the system that, there's a lot of work to be done. And so, cell phone cameras for sure. It has changed the game, and still it's not enough.
Yeah. Hakeem, you were going to hop in there a second ago?
Yeah. Personally, I've had such an array of mixed emotions. Honestly, right off the jump, my natural emotion was militant. I felt militant after this. I was blood boiling angry. Because this is, it's that feeling of when is this going to stop? And, I come from an interesting background. My father was a New Jersey state trooper for 20 years. So I kind of have that perspective of both sides. But, personally coming from, I went to a predominantly white institution, Monmouth University. I went to boarding school for high school, which was probably 15 black people at our school. And the reaction from my peers has it's taken that gut-wrenching feeling and made it exponentially worse. When you see some of the responses of of ignorance and of people willing to die on their swords of some of their, extremely, prejudiced ways, just to be blunt about it. And then when you're looking at just from a nationwide level, obviously from the leadership, that response, and then you look at it from a symbolic response, I don't think that it should take George Floyd being murdered on national TV for the Confederate flags to be removed, for Confederate statues to be removed, using the BS excuse of it's just a heritage type of thing. When you're walking around, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe St. Charles County Courthouse, they used to auction slaves there, and like that's real, and it's just shining a big light on all of that. And so from an emotional standpoint, processing it, I've gotten past the militant phase, and I'm really in a place of figuring out what are the next steps. One of my biggest things that I'm trying to scream from the rooftops, I know Kelli, you mentioned systemic. I think everyone, we hear that word every day, systemic institution, systemic, but most people don't understand what the system really is. And I've been screaming from the rooftops for everyone to take an hour and 20 minutes to watch the documentary 13. That actually truly explains the systematic history of racism for the past 400 years and how and what Black people have had to go through. Yeah.
No, it's really good. I had a friend challenge me a week ago, and a friend of color, and I was just talking to her about stuff, and she asked me a question that was like, and like as a white person, she's like, kind of, what work have you done? Towards, and my initial reaction was frustration, because I was like, I'm like a progressive white guy, and I realized that when you talk about this idea of like systemic racism, there is so much that I don't even realize that I'm a part of. And my wife and I just watched 13 last night. We have just over the last week started reading White Fragility and listening to this podcast 1619, and we looked at each other in the middle of the movie, and we were like, we knew this was a thing, but how are we so ignorant to not know it was like right under our nose? And I think that as a white person, I think that's the hard thing. And as I saw these images, it was gut wrenching and it was painful to see. But the hard thing was realizing that this is something that happens that I'm so ignorant to, because I don't have to experience it on Aaron. I don't have to worry about running, and I don't have to worry about those sorts of things. And so just to my experience it. But Noah, kind of letting you wrap us up, as you saw these as a white man and in Minneapolis, what was kind of your thought of all that?
Yeah. So our church is in St. Paul, and really close to kind of where the epicenter of the St. Paul, uprising. People will say riots, but we're trying to kind of change language and call it uprising. Literally blocks from my house is where, buildings were burning down and all that stuff. I've had so many emotions, but the reason why Danny asked me here is because I'm sort of, geographically a white leader in the middle of the epicenter of this current moment. And my primary reason for being here is to model what I think is the most appropriate response of white Christians. And that's to have a white male leader show up, shut up, and listen. Because I think that white people are not hearing. We have not heard for 400 years or the last 100 years or 50 years or 10 years. We have not heard our brothers and sisters of color. We are not hearing their lives. And the fact that we're in this moment, having to watch it play out on TV, is simply because white men will not listen. And so I'm here to listen. I'm here to be part of the conversation. Honestly, I'm here to try to pass the mic as much as I can, but to model white leadership, showing up and opening our ears, because you guys all bear the burden of systemic racism, but I think white men particularly bear the responsibility for systemic racism. We've done it. It's our problem. That's what we've done. And so we need to start hearing. If we could only hear our brothers and sisters, maybe, just maybe, I don't have answers, but good Lord, we have to start by humanizing people and hearing them. So that's my main emotional response right now. But good Lord, it's been a roller coaster this last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, and no, I appreciate you saying that. And I think we'll head into the second question. So we'll be a little more like freewheeling with the bites of whatever you have. And so you can feel free to take a bite to whatever you have if you have something. But the second question that I just want to throw out is this: like, my wife and I, again, we were trying to trace this back, and I imagine it's different for my Black friends versus my white friends. But like, we were trying to trace back, like, when was the first time we realized what race was, and then like racism. And because I grew up in a suburb of Portland, Oregon, a predominantly white area, and we tried to trace back my first friend of color. And I think I said the first friend of color I remember was kindergarten. But then I don't remember a single person of color in my life, teacher, friend, anyone in my neighborhood, until I was a sophomore in high school. And no teachers in seminary. I had one seminary professor as a person of color. And so for me, race was like something that I think I knew, but the idea of even my whiteness never really like stuck to me because I was in the predominantly white area. And then for racism, like, it was just such, like, now I look back and I see subversive racism, and I see things that when I was 15, 16, 17, 18, I wouldn't have said were. And so I just wonder for each of us, Noah, for you, for all of us, like, and anyone can kick this one off, but what was your kind of first memory with experiencing race or realizing race? And then if you've experiencing racism, like, when you can kind of track that back.
I want to jump in right here because it connects exactly to what you just got through saying. And I think that speaks volumes. A friend of mine that I was great friends with is a white guy. And when we would go somewhere that's predominantly Black, he would say to me, I don't realize I'm white until I'm around amongst a bunch of Black people. So what he's saying that he doesn't realize, like, we as Black people, we know our skin. We know our skin. We know we're different. We just have adjusted and adapted, and it doesn't phase us. But we know that we are a different color. We know that. But I think it meant something when he said he didn't realize that his whiteness until he was amongst someone of the opposite race. And I think a lot of times people that are not Black, they're living life, and this is the norm for them until they realize they're in another place that's opposite of their color. And I just think that's just kind of a way of looking at it that kind of help people to see that you don't really know, you don't carry the things that we perhaps carry, our ancestors, our past, things that we've experienced because you haven't had to. So I just think that acknowledging that, it's something is one of the first steps. And when you grow up in a society that looks like a norm, you don't know any different. So my grandparents live in Louisiana, so I'm from the South. Okay. And I remember growing up as a child, the Black community lived on one side of the track and a white community lived on the other side of the track. But in this, there was harmony. Like, I never felt like, oh, I need to go over there, or oh, they need to come over here. It was actually like felt normal. And until I would go back as an adult, I looked at that and realized that's not right. But when you were a child, you're growing up in it, it doesn't feel any different. So I think there's also something to be said about, like you said, you grew up in a society, your life, you really didn't encounter many Black people. When you kind of grow up in those spaces, that's your norm, and you think it's okay. Until obviously you as you get older, you see that shouldn't be the norm. So that's kind of it's not overt racism as a child. It's kind of like you just grow into it and you don't even recognize it as racism, which is not a good thing either.
What I find interesting is that it is 2020 and there are still some white boys and girls who have never laid eyes on a person of color. I find that is extremely interesting. I used to hear that years ago, that there are literally people who have never had to be around people of color their entire lives. And so I remember having an encounter with a little kid who just could not take their eyes off of me. They were mind blown because it was their first experience actually seeing a Black person. And I was so taken aback that I asked the parent, was everything okay? And she verbalized to me that that was her child's first encounter with a Black person. And so it is so mind blowing for me because Black people don't have that experience, right? We know about white people and we've been taught white history our entire lives. And so it's mind blowing that it's 2020 and we're still there, that is still a reality for some people. And I can think back when I kind of thought about that question. I've had some issues and some experiences as a younger person, but my first pastoral assignment where I actually was groomed and began to kind of come into ministry was at a church here in North County, an all-white church. And I remember being there and a person telling me, do you realize you are standing on the grounds where slaves are buried? And so, and knowing that was the truth, because being in that building, the history is still there where we can still see the sanctuary, the original sanctuary where Blacks were not allowed to sit in the audience with whites. There's still a segregated area that's still there to this day. And yes, there are slaves that are still on that ground. But the fact that that person had the goal to actually let me know and remind me of my place, and this was no more than about 6 or 7 years ago, that I was standing on the grounds of slaves. So it was to let me know, it's a privilege for you to be here. And these things are still happening. They're still happening. So North County is where I was raised. North County is where this church still sits, not understanding that until really in my earlier adult years of how segregated St. Louis really is and how white flight really hit the suburbs and specifically North County. And I don't know, and I'm not going to go back too far into the history, but understanding how when our projects were torn down in the city, a lot of our counties made sure that lower income housing could not happen there within their places. And so it kind of got segregated or concentrated, I should say is the right word, into one area. So there is a whole racial, especially being here in St. Louis. You can't be in St. Louis and not know the history that comes along with being here, because it's still we're still feeling the remnants and the effects of simply the divide that's happening right here in our own city.
Yeah, I'll jump in there, and this is another conversation for another time. But Kelli hit the head on the nail. Pruitt-Igoe, when they tore Pruitt-Igoe down, they funneled all the Black Section 8 housing out to Blackjack, North County. That's a whole nother story for a different time. You're gonna talk about systemic racism. That's you had white real estate agents moving into working these communities on both sides. After the Supreme Court had overturned, what was the historic case in the Ville, Shelley versus Kramer?
Yeah.
The Supreme Court overturned, so you can't do housing covenants, right? So now Blacks can purchase housing in all white communities. Real estate agents getting it coming and going. What they're going to do is they're going to sell a house to a Black because a Black can buy that house now in a community that formerly had a covenant. Then they're going across the street to the white families and saying, hey, you better sell that house before the Blacks move in. Your property value is going to go down. It's crazy. Anyway, that's another story for another time.
Right.
But I'm going to answer this question kind of as two questions. What is your first memory of experiencing race, and what is your first memory of experiencing racism? I'll answer the racism first. So. We actually beat the curve. We moved out of the city and into North County before there were hardly any Blacks out there. I mean, but here are some of the things that I remember as a kid, just wanting to have friends. And I particularly remember the having white friends in the neighborhood, and some of the names that, they would call me, and I'd never heard them before. And I didn't know why they would, so I didn't know what a coon was. I didn't know what a spook was. I didn't know what a jigaboo was. I didn't know what African booty scratch was. And so I just remember as a kid And it would particularly happen if I was one-on-one with a white friend. It seemed like, okay, everything was fine. But as soon as there was more than one white person, then that's where all the names would start. And I was confused by that. I didn't understand that.
Mm.
I didn't understand why, people would, drive by our house and yell the N-word. I didn't understand why they would throw trash on our lawn. I remember, just as a kid, I was about 6 years old, and just going to my mom, I just didn't understand what we did. Like, I don't understand. What did we do? Why are you TP in our house? I don't know. What is that all about? And so trying to make sense of this world as a kid, that's the memories that I have is what was I just couldn't understand the hatred, and I couldn't understand why people that didn't know us didn't like us. And so that was kind of my first experience of racism. First experience of race, and I think about this in the first time that my parents specifically communicated to me that the world would see me different. So there was another black kid who had moved into the neighborhood. We were in second grade, and we were going to walk to the store. It was the first time my mom was going to let us walk to the store. And she said that we could go to the store. And she said, hey, boy, when you go to the store, she's just like, you make sure you get you a receipt. And I looked at her like I was just kind of confused by that. And she said, boy, you heard what I said. And I said, yes, ma'am. And I said, but Mama, why do I need to get a receipt? And she said, because if the people think you stole something, you can prove that you didn't steal it because you got a receipt. And that was the day, you talk about innocence. That was the day that I recognized that my mom was communicating to me that the world is going to see you different and is going to operate towards you different. And I didn't understand that. I said, Mom, you taught me not to steal. Why would I steal something? And Mom, why would they think I would steal? It was just so baffling to me. But that's the reality. So, never leave the store without getting a receipt. Never leave the store without getting a bag. That's just, yeah. So those are my two experiences.
Yeah. Aaron, how much of that stuff, and for me, like, if there's any, like, how much of that is stuck with you to adulthood? Like, is that when you hear story, like, does that like stick with you because I think for a white guy like me, I'd be like, that doesn't cross my mind. And so to hear that's baffling.
I laugh every time I see a white person walk out of the store without a bag or a receipt. Here, I have a friend of mine. We went into a store. I was in college, white buddy of mine. We played football together. We went into a grocery store. He was thirsty, bought like a 2-liter or something, stood in line and drank it. I looked at him like, what are you doing? There's no way I would have done that.
Right.
He drank it all before he paid for it. The clerk never asked him a thing.
Right.
So I just kind of chuckle, but that's the world that we live in.
Yeah. Yeah. Hakeem or no, you got any kind of addition to this?
Definitely. So me, myself, I grew up in a place in South Jersey. It's a suburb of Philadelphia. So we were widely diverse, but as a black person, we were the majority, whites were the minorities. So growing up through the public school system, we didn't experience a much amount of racism because from my experience, it felt like white people were almost scared of us. And a lot of, I'd say you call it racism, but I call it more microaggressions, stereotypes, subconscious and if not conscious biases, just growing up. So I was always naturally bigger than everyone. So when I played soccer when I was little, me and my brother were probably the only black kids on the field. But I remember my parents getting in fights with other parents because they're like, who is this kid? He's so big. He's so tall. He's probably got kids. He's this, he's that. Where's his birth certificate? And I was recently just talking to someone about this, and it's like, it's crazy how a conscious bias like that, where it feels as if you feel like a 14-year-old, a 10-year-old, 9-year-old black kid is a threat to you on a conscious level, as you grow older and you wind up becoming, say, a police officer, say a lawyer, say a judge, that conscious bias turns into a subconscious bias. And I think that's how people get murdered. And, you know, growing up and then going to a boarding school that was predominantly white, you know, seeing those subtle just microaggressions, those, oh, you talk so white, you act white. And I'm like, when you hear that as a Black person, that it's a wild feeling. It's a feeling of confusion. It's a feeling of, am I talking white? Am I like, what am I like? And it's like, I'm Black. I can't take my skin off. Do you know what I'm saying? It's dealing with that, you know, essentially your entire life is, it's obviously it's never a great or fun feeling. But I think it's those small subtleties of microaggressions, of stereotypes and conscious and subconscious biases that lead to a system of just all out complacency amongst everyone, because it's like, that's just how it is. And like, until we start having these conversations like this, until we start watching some of these documentaries and, you know, people really actually, like Noah said, listening, is how a real change can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't have to start dealing with my own whiteness until I was, you know, in seminary, at grad school. You know, I moved to Chicago, which, you know, is not Oregon, and a much more diverse place. And I moved to a seminary that had racial identity as part of the culture of theological learning, and was challenged. And I'll just say, as you know, as a 22-year-old person, 23-year-old person, to all of a sudden have to be challenged with my own racial identity, you know what I mean? It's too late. It's way too late in your life to be 22, 23 going, oh, so it means something that I'm white now? Crap, I got to deal with that. So just sort of echo Danny's experience of not having, you know, I think that's pretty typical white experience. We don't have to deal with it. Just don't.
Yeah, and even what Hakeem said, like the idea that like you talk white, like it makes this idea of like whiteness very normative. And if you're someone maybe like Noah, you and I, like where you grow up in a predominantly white neighborhood, like I remember the few friends I had that were people of color having said that when I was in high school. People have said that to them. I probably said that to them, and I think it's just such an interesting thing you say. It's like, oh, that's not an offense. It's like, this is the normative culture. And then you think back on it, like, that's like completely stripping this away. And it makes it like my culture is somehow better. And so
100%. I think to add on to that, like even playing basketball growing up, it's like my favorite sport, and it's something wild. And I'm not sure if any of you guys experienced this or heard this, but if you play on, say, a more of a predominantly white team, or like coming from a private school background, whenever we played an inner city team, so we're going to Newark, we're going to Trenton, we're going to New York, it was, guys, the stereotypical description of the team is, these guys are unorganized. These guys, all we got to do is slow them down and stick to our game and play our disciplined, organized basketball, and that's how we'll beat them. And it's like something as subtle as that, you know, at the core, that person might not be a racist. This is a person you might hang out with all the time. But I think the small subtleties like that is what stems into a subconscious bias that now it's, okay, Black people are unorganized. Black people are undisciplined. And like that carries along with you the rest of your life.
Yeah, that's good. That's real good.
Yeah.
You know,
well, thank you guys. Go ahead, Kelly.
Go ahead, Kelly. Again, I'm thinking about all of this, and I'm thinking about how now I also live now in a predominantly white neighborhood, but I'm always looking for people of color. And I've challenged my own self. My husband and I have gone back and forth about raising a little brown girl and what those effects are going to be on her, not seeing more diversity, but we're fighting this educational issue. You know, we're trying to make sure that she is getting an education that is going to really set her up for success, but at the same time understanding within our community, and I don't want to say the actual percentage, but there's like a percentage. If so many Black people move within a particular neighborhood, the property value goes down. And it's just, again, it's mind blowing. It is something that I don't know what it's going to take for us to really make the strides that we need, but we have got to figure out what it is that we can do in terms of this voting and making sure that we're getting the right people in on these school boards.
Yeah.
I've got a real bad, I love my city, and I know that this is a worldwide issue. We're in COVID, but racism is something that's killing us quicker than COVID or any other pandemic ever could. And at the same time, there's just not enough movement happening fast enough. We shouldn't be having to make decisions about living in predominantly white neighborhoods simply to make sure that our kids are getting a better education. And you feel some kind of way about that because I wanted to, say maybe I should stay within a particular community, and you can kind of shame yourself within that by not doing it. And you think about, but who's gonna reap the repercussions? Your kids, So
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Aaron.
I was going to say, James Cone, who's a Black theologian in the 60s, Black liberation theology, and I don't espouse everything that James Cone says, but there's a few things he got right. One of the things that he said that slavery is America's original sin. And so if by original sin he means the worst sin with the farthest reaching repercussions, he's absolutely right. So here is part of the problem. Ta-Nehisi Coates says this. He says it's in the DNA of America to abuse Black life, Black bodies. So out of slavery, this is the most devastating team. Hakeem keeps alluding to this with conscious and unconscious bias. And so what happened to America's consciousness as slavery grows in America is this disregard. So for the long time, it was acceptable to have a disregard for Black life. After 400 years, that doesn't just go away, and it plays out in 5,000 different directions. It plays out in poorest healthcare for Blacks. It plays out in inequality in education. It plays out in wealth gap. It plays out in residential segregation. The higher concentrations of Blacks in a place, the more whites and others move out. The misproportionate numbers of people of color incarcerated based on the percentages of them living in America. It goes on and on and on. So what are we talking about? It is this subtle and not so subtle disregard for Black life. And it plays out in the unconscious. And you see, for years, you see how it plays out. And so until we can begin to have some transformation in mind about that, it's just going to play out in a different way.
Yeah. And one of the things, it might have been in the book I was reading, but it had it just so interesting, the comment that racism is the most agile structure out there. It shifts and it changes, and it's continually evolving. And I wonder, Kelli and Aaron, you guys both kind of segued to this, but I wonder, this is a group of not just people of color and Noah and myself, but it's also of pastors and leaders and entrepreneurs and business leaders and just voices that get to speak into maybe culture in a different way than just kind of your average person, because you guys are leading in ways in place that. So I wonder, just kind of a two-part question, just kind of how, where do we go from here? How do we move the needle? And Kelli, you even said, I'm not even sure. And so maybe there's no concrete answer, but I wonder, we're sitting here and we're wondering, there's people like me that are really trying to, be able to engage in the conversation. Again, I said I'm the progressive white person. I remember my church did a series, Race in the Gospel, and I just wanted a Black person to come in and tell me what to do to fix it. And I realized, oh no, I have to do work. No one can tell me what, I'm part of the structure and the issue. I need to hear stories of Black and brown people, but I'm holding the system up in a lot of ways. And so I wonder, just from Noah to Reshaunda, Kelli, Layton, Hakeem, kind of when you think about, from your perspective, how do we move the needle? What would you say? And then the second part of that is, because I believe faith speaks into this. And so what do you think the gospel has to say about how we move the needle? And so kind of where do we go from here? And what does the gospel have to say about it? And anyone can, I kind of like just throw out a massive question, but anyone can jump in first. So
Yeah, we're supposed to be loving our neighbor as we love ourselves. I mean, that's the second commandment. And in order for us to do that, we are going to have to be intentional to spend time with people who don't look like us. And we're going to have to listen to people's stories, their experiences, understand the context of how they became who they are without having a wall up and ready to, already have an answer for what they think or what the person believes of another person. And so really being able to take yourself out of having the answer and listening. So being intentional to build those relationships, and then also educating people, educating your children. When I hear people say we don't see color, of course you see color. Of course kids, they see color. It's just that kids, when they see color, they don't see, there's no malice with it. There's no prejudice with it. But we need to see one another's colors. We need to see how we're different, because to not see our differences is really just to deny the creativity that God has placed in each and every one of us. We are the image of God. So God looks like all the different races here, all the different sizes, everyone who comes from different backgrounds. We all are image bearers of God. And so those are just two ways that I think if we want to kind of move the needle, we've got to start spending time with other people and really kind of ingratiating ourselves in other folks' culture. I have come to realize over the last several years how arrogant it is of us to not know about other people, how arrogant it is for us to not understand other people's religious traditions, and just really kind of be isolated. It's an arrogant, westernized way of being. And so for my own self, I'm starting that by making sure that I am spending time with people who don't look like me, people who don't believe like me, and people who come from different places and experiences from myself.
Cool. Thanks, Kelli.
Yep.
First, go ahead. Do your thing.
You sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Words that I kind of went on a blank with this. So, the question is, where do we go from here? It's impossible to try to tackle everything in one time. It's so deep and so wide. And so, I feel like, getting where you fit in, find different areas within this whole big mess that you can participate in, that you can put your services in, that you can advocate for, that you can get on boards for. I mean, all the different levels that Hakeem and Aaron talked about, the systemic portion of it. Where can you find where you can make a change? And if everyone seeks to find where they can make a change in their own way, that's how it can be pieced together. That's how things can slowly evolve. You try to do it all, you don't know where to go, so we freeze. So instead of just seeing it as an overwhelming entity, how can we find ways to find out where we can play a role in helping to change overall? That's one thing. Another thing, when you're supporting, support goes by your actions and your words. So we are seeing a lot of signs, a lot of posts, a lot of support. And it really feels great as a Black person, see the diversity and see people really kind of standing up. It's great. But what I also want to see is that action behind it. When no one's watching, let's say you have the ability to hire someone and one person's name is Jaquan and one person's name is Jimmy, and you clearly know that one is Black and white, and that's totally fine. But recognize that there are different races. There's nothing wrong with that. But choose based off their resume. Create equality. That's your opportunity to create change when you have the opportunity when you're behind the scenes to make the right choice, or to make the choice based off of their qualifications and look at them as the same and not different. So to me, like, those are ways that change can start to happen. You can support all you want, but what are your actions saying when no one's watching, when you have that opportunity right there, what are you doing? So that would be like my thoughts on how to take the next steps. And in regards to religion, I'll be quick with this, but it's two parallel stories that I experienced and that I saw. They're totally different, but they mean the same thing. I did the Mozambique trip right before the coronavirus, and there was a moment where I was presented with gifts, and it was a community that spoke a different language on the other side of the world, and they presented these gifts to me, and I was humbled and I was crying, and all I thought was, we're all the same. We're all the same. We're all God's children. Fast forward that to 2 days ago, my mom sent me this video of a church. You can tell it was a church. There was a white church and a black church. You had an array of white church members kneeling down and praying to the black community, of just asking for forgiveness, not what they've done, maybe things that they may have done unknowingly, but for representing, the ancestors and just the pain that this black community has faced. And what I saw, and then the black community knelt down and prayed with them. And to me, again, it showed me again, these people that were praying saw that, again, we're all God's children. So I think at the end of the day, no matter what race you are, no matter what part of the country you live in, whatever language you speak, when you start looking at people as we are all the same, we're all God's children, that's when we take the blinders down. That's how we can really have that heart to recognize we are people and we're equal. And that's what I want to see. I just want to see total equality and recognition of that.
Yeah. Thanks, Reshaunda. Aaron or Hakeem, Noah?
I mean, I can tell you what I'm doing just in my life and open to ideas. I'm having conversations with my kids that my parents never had with me, and my parents are good parents, but we live in a much more diverse community, and that's intentionally because I just refuse to raise my kids in a homogenous culture. Where I'm having conversations with my parents that my parents have never had with me. I'm having conversations in our congregation that we've never had. We're talking about what it means to be trauma informed and to step into people's trauma. Because our community is traumatized right now. And mostly I'm recasting the vision for I think for a long time, white Christians have had this great idea that if we were just diverse, that would be enough. But a pastor in my denomination recently wrote a book called Rediscipling the White Church from Cheap Diversity to True Solidarity. David Swanson is his name. I think there's something in that we have to move past this idea of, well, if we're just in proximity is a step. It's something we need. A lot of us grew up without proximity, but it's not enough. We really need solidarity. We need to care about George Floyd before the knee goes on his neck. We have to care about him before he dies. And we have to care about the people who are being abused by cops right now, who will never be on TV, before they die, because they're humans, because they're made in God's image. And we have to have solidarity and care about that. And we have to be hurt by other people's pain. And for so many white people, it's so easy to just not care because we can just scroll past the video and move on. So those are the things that I'm shooting for. And of course I'm voting. So.
Yeah. I'll say this quickly. I would say, first of all, is to ask yourself the question, and for those who are Christians out there, ask the Holy Spirit, what is it that I am not seeing? What is it that I'm not seeing? Reveal this to me, right? And then the other thing I would say is we've all been socialized, generally, first and foremost, by our family, by our friends, what we watch on TV, and now it's social media. So we've been socialized in what we think about the other. And so if this conversation is Black, we can extend that to minorities. And so what I think is important, because many won't have the courage to go here, is to explore the thinking in the way that I've been raised to think about Blacks, to think about minorities, and really go to those places, because it's not helpful if everybody in the room says, you know, I only know good things about black people, or I only know good things about white people. See, my parents are from the South. And I know what my parents told me. My parents told me, they said, you know what? They were like, that's fine that you have these white kids as friends, but at the end of the day, they gonna stick together. So don't be surprised when they do that, right? So my parents are operating out of their experience. So for my white brothers and sisters, you got to lean in hard to say, you know what? I did learn some things from my parents, right? That add to this, or I did learn some things. Now, I'm not calling your parents racist. That's not what I'm saying, right? But what I'm saying is, be courageous enough to explore what are the thoughts that I have about black people, right? Do I truly see them? And not like the black people here. We know how to code switch, right? We know how to remind you, to make you forget that we are people of color. We can do that. We've lived amongst whites long enough. But there are other ethnic minorities who can't, right? The ones that images come to mind of thug and criminal, even though you haven't seen them do a thing, right? So you got to explore that type of thinking. That's transformative. And for the Christian, it's transformative because you see in every way that you're not like Jesus. And then you can say, Lord, have mercy on me, because I do not see my brother. I do not love my brother like I love myself, as my sister Kelli said. So ask the Holy Spirit, what is it that I'm not seeing? Be courageous to explore the socialization that started from your family to your friends to whatever you watch, social media, right? And then be courageous to become an advocate or an ally. At the end of the day, when I'm talking to my white brothers and sisters, the end game is advocate and allies, right? So imagine this real quick. I'm sorry, I know I'm taking time. Imagine this real quick. George Floyd is down there, right? Cop's got his knee in his neck. You hear black people saying, get up off of his neck. All right, so my thought is like, okay, where's the white soccer mom or the white businessman that walks up to the cop and says, you know what? That's unnecessary. I got your badge number. I got you in camera right now. I'm calling your sergeant right now. That thing goes down different when white people use their voice, right? Mm-hmm. So as an advocate and ally, now that's an extreme situation. So you want to get to the place where in your everyday life, and you will have situations where you can be an advocate and ally, even amongst family, even amongst friends, right? So that's what's helpful, right? So.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron.
That's real. From my own perspective, I think it's definitely a multifaceted approach. I think it ultimately starts with education. You know, we hear it all the time, and I know it's easy for you to say vote, like you yourself vote. And I hear it from my white counterparts, especially on social media platforms, as if, you know, black people want change, they need to be out in the polls and they need to vote. And black people, we say the same thing to our fellow black people, but I think a lot of us need to educate ourselves on what's really going on from a voter suppression standpoint, from a nationwide level in some of these different areas and sectors of the country. And I think a light was shined bright on it. I think it was yesterday or 2 days ago in Georgia, when you saw clear as day exactly what was happening from a voter suppression standpoint. And then you've got our president screaming out loud of how he doesn't want mail-in ballots because if no one votes, then Republicans win. And I think from an education standpoint, most people don't realize what's going on from a voter suppression standpoint, how the polls changed last seconds, how transportation all of a sudden isn't there to come from certain areas for people to even vote. Because you see it all the time in the social media posts. You want change to happen. Look at all the people who didn't vote in this area, this area, this area, this area, but we're not really tapping into why. It's not necessarily people are waking up and saying, oh, I don't want to vote, blah, 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 blah. There's real stuff going on from that angle. Another angle is trying to figure out who's a leader and who's not. I think we hear it all the time of imagine if Martin Luther King, imagine if Malcolm X, imagine if they had social media back then. I don't think they would have been as powerful or as effective as leaders if it actually did exist. I think with social media, it allows these almost false prophets to stand out of someone who's got 1 million followers or 500,000 followers, whether it's a celebrity, whether it's an athlete, entertainer, whose intent might not necessarily be in the right place when it comes to, I'm just putting this post out, I'm being this activist, because if I don't, my followers are going to crush me in that sense. Because I think in reality, if Malcolm X existed in this day, or Martin Luther King, and I think there is a Malcolm X and Martin Luther King out there, but I think they only have 2,000 followers on their social media platforms, and their message isn't necessarily being amplified. So I think it's up to everyone who has that knack to be that leader, to be a leader amongst themselves, amongst their community, and make that small change in someone who's right next door in that sense. And then I think from a tactical standpoint, I think that we need tangibles as a Black community that we want to happen. I think just saying we don't want the police to kill us anymore, like, we've been saying that for years, and it's still going to continue to happen. Just saying we don't want white people to hate us, we don't want racism to exist anymore, I don't think that's enough of a tangible to actually, one, have satisfaction, because it's always going to happen in that sense. So I think from a tangible standpoint, something small that I was recently thinking about and talking to one of my friends about is, I think from a nationwide level, municipality to municipality, that there should be a community-ran police review board that goes down with every single complaint. So it's small, it's tangible, and it's doable. I don't know how it could happen. And if someone out there's got the power to make something like that happen, I think something like that could, one, give us some type of sense of a feeling that, okay, maybe these people actually care about us. Maybe we're getting to a place of some sort of change. And I think we need to figure out small steps to get us to a place of, I wouldn't call it happiness, but at least change.
Yeah. Well, I know, so there was a comment a while back just on, I think someone asked for books and resources, and we have a private chat here that has just been populated with a ton of those. And before we go, I can't comment from where I'm at, but we'll make sure either any of you can throw those in the comments, or we'll pop them in the comments when we're done. But I know someone had asked earlier, hey, can we have some just reading resources on that. And so, and I appreciate you guys saying that. We're kind of going to move to our second to last question, which is a chance, like, if anyone has questions, to throw them out there for anyone. So you can throw those out there if you have anything that you want to throw out. And while we wait, Aaron, I think you said this, and so sorry, misquote me if I'm wrong, if I'm taking someone else or giving you credit for someone else's thought, but you had made a comment about we want allies and advocates, and I think you said that. But I was having the same conversation earlier today, just like kind of, and just professing with honesty and kind of humility where I'm at. Like, I would have said up to yesterday that I was an ally, and I had this really come to Jesus moment that, like, I'm just a guy with a voice who makes a post like once in a while, and I haven't done any work to like be an ally to my friends of color, and which is like just kind of like not only an embarrassing thing to say, but just like a humbling thing to say, to be like, I have the ability to sit kind of in my place. And so I know, just for kind of any of my white friends that are watching, and I know we have a lot of white folks in our audience, but I think to your point, Aaron, like, I think that's the place we hope to move, and wondering, like, for folks like, and I don't know if this is a question, maybe it's rhetorical, but if he wants to speak into it, like, think of like this movement from just voice to ally. Like, how does that move?
I want to speak to it right there really quickly.
Yeah.
I was all for allyship, and so having a conversation with a girlfriend who really challenged me to even think different. I'm not really sure that we need allies. I think allies are probably the first step. Allyship is simply educating yourself enough to know what is happening in communities that are not within your own. What we really need is co-conspirators. We need people who are willing to go beyond just understanding and knowing and empathizing, to literally coming alongside of us and strategizing, how do we get to the solution of what the problem is? And they won't stop until we have seen some resolution. So I am beginning to challenge people, let's go beyond allyship. And being an ally is not bad, because you have to start there. But when you get agitated enough and you get uncomfortable enough, and if I really am your sister, regardless of color, you're going to say, as long as systems are in place that are causing you and people who are like you to not be able to thrive. And just because a few of us, and I keep hearing this, I saw this earlier, Black people should stop saying, they don't have equal opportunity. We have Black people who have succeeded and who have made it. That is a very small minority group of people. We will never close the economic gap because of what slavery has done to us. But until we can get people who will link arm in arm with us and say, we're going to do this messy work with you, we're going to be willing to lose position and whatever it takes, because that is what it's going to take for us to really see some sustainable and lasting change. So we need some co-conspirators with us.
Yeah. So well said. I'm gonna link ally and advocacy. And this co-conspirator, absolutely, because ally is I'm here, I'm there for you. But I agree with Kelly. It has to go beyond that. Advocacy is use your voice. And let me give you a simple everyday example of this white man being an advocate. So this was years ago. There was this dodgeball fundraiser. And so kids could sign up for this. And it just so happened that there was a kid that went to Westminister, black kid. So he got a dodgeball team with all his black friends, right? And so there was, let's say, 10 teams. Most of the teams were white, some were a little bit mixed, but you had this all black team. So this all black team gets into this championship, right? And everybody's watching. Everybody's watching this. Well, the referee, I'm looking at this game and I'm like, this referee is calling all of these bad calls against the black kids. And I'm sitting here and I'm looking around and nobody's saying anything. So it's mainly white parents. A white dad comes up to me. I guess he saw my face and he said, I see it. He said, I see it. He's not making the right calls for that black team. I see it. And I looked at him and I said, I see it too. He went up to the referee and he said, hey, he said, call it right. He said, you were calling this against this black team. And he said, I see it. He said, call it right. That's advocacy. I was like, what's good? Let's go. But see, it's so check this out. Not only did that make make a difference day to day to me, because one of our greatest critiques towards our white brothers and sisters, Dr. King talked about it, it's the silence of our friends. It's like, what? You see that and you're not going to say nothing. But man, imagine those black boys seeing this white man going to bat for them, right, where it cost him something in front of a whole bunch of white parents. I'm like, that type of courage, that's when you get some movement, right? So that's just I'm a little bit hype. That was hype.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'll move us to our final question, but I want to give Noah, Reshaunda, Hakeem, is there you want to add anything to what we just kind of threw out there, this kind of advocate ally question before we go to the last thing?
I could tap a little bit into this Drew Brees situation. I'm sure, I think everyone here is, I hope has, or not hope, or hopefully has seen what's kind of went down with that. And to make a macro comment, I think what went down with that is almost a microcosm of our entire country, of how, somebody has a statement, they're willing to die on that sword, and then it's just it leaves it leaves no room to have a conversation. And I think, especially when you have a platform the size of someone like Drew Brees, a lot of people, when it comes down to being an advocate or being an ally, you have to have that willingness to go into an uncomfortable place. Yep. Drew Brees didn't want to have that uncomfortable conversation on live TV. It was a question. I don't know what the specific question was, but it was blunt about, I will never support taking a knee because my grandfather fought in the military. And that's you willing to not even have your mind go to an uncomfortable place when most people have ignored the simple fact that Colin Kaepernick took a knee because a member of our army, a Green Beret, is the person who told him to take a knee, because he said that that would be the respectful way to peacefully protest this. And it's almost like it's just falling on deaf ears. Like, people, you hear what you want to hear at the end of the day. And I think, one, as a country, and if being an ally, being an advocate, it takes a significant amount of empathy. And I think lack of empathy is it's the root of this country. It's the root of the entitlement that this country has. Is we have so much entitlement and also no empathy on top of that. It's a perfect recipe for disaster, racism, and systematic oppression. And I think once we can get to the place where, like, I mean, it's blunt, white people can have a certain amount of empathy towards the Black struggle. How Noah mentioned trauma, like especially in Minneapolis, like a reaction to trauma is, you can't judge someone's reaction to trauma at the end of the day. Like, a kid who has trauma going into school probably acts out, probably yells at teacher, probably curses, probably gets into fights. And we're just in such a place of judgment. And we're not even going to a place of empathy and actually trying to say, I feel you. And let me actually, it's impossible to walk a mile in someone's shoes. You can't do that. But it is possible to walk beside someone. And like, that's what we don't have right now.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Well, I'll, I think, move us to our kind of final question, which is just kind of the final take. Like, the question was kind of, if you had an option to just say, like, we have an audience, and it's funny that we just spiked people watching right when I said it's your final take, so people are ready for that. But if you could say anything to our audience that's listening, kind of how we move towards healing, how we move away from kind of ripping things apart in pain, to Kelli and Aaron's point, to be co-conspirators, to be advocates. And not, I wouldn't even say, actually, caveat, like, not even just to speak to white people. Like, I feel free to speak to whatever, like, but what if your final take, just kind of what's the thing you want to leave us with? And so, Hakeem, you've had to go last on everyone. And so I'm going to let you go first on this one. And so, and then we'll end it in reverse order.
Cool. I mean, honestly, my final take is, it's reiterating some of the stuff I've already said. I think my number one piece of advice is, like I said, it's education and actually putting in the work. And I consider putting in the work is taking that hour and 20 minutes. Everyone has Netflix in 2020 to watch 13. It's a beaten record, but your average American, like I said, Black or white, does not understand the system behind it all.
I think we lost you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear him.
I can hear him.
He's there.
We lost me.
Yeah.
We lost me, friends. We lost my
We didn't need him anyways. Yeah.
Hey, your average, so back what I was saying, your average American does not understand the system. Like, there's a system there. The first step is educating yourself so you can actually figure out a way. One, where are you? What side of history are you on? What side of this are you on? And how can you actually move forward and make a change? And then lastly is just less judgment and more empathy. Like, that's what it ultimately comes down to. Like, we're naturally inclined to be in the position of just judge, and pontificate our own thoughts. Like, they always say it, we've got, 2 ears and 1 mouth. Like, sit back, listen, and then have empathy, and then take it from there.
Thank you. I said before that I think white people are, obviously the people who need to do the work here, especially white men. And my final take is to say thank you. In my journey towards racial reconciliation, the only thing that's made it possible is people of color who have been gracious with me more than I deserve. There's a lot, everybody's on a journey, right? And they're all in lots of different places. And I know it's not fair to ask people to wait for us to arrive. That's not fair at all. But I have experienced so many people of color who have been so gracious with me, helping me by honestly pointing out my BS and calling it to the carpet and correcting my language. And they shouldn't have to do any of that, right? I should be the one doing that. But it's been very helpful to me. And so praise the Lord for brothers and sisters who are people of color who have been gracious and compassionate with me and my white congregation as we try to figure it out and try to figure out how to be better and honestly just make a world where our kids don't have to deal with this. So thank you. That's my final take.
I'll just say real quick, any solution is a community solution, and any solution includes police officers, whatever that means. It's whether it's training, whether it's legislation, any solution, it's a community solution, right? And the police have a part to play in that. I don't see any community solution that excludes police officers being a part of the solution, at least to this particular situation as it relates to violence and things. Of course.
Cool. Kelli or Reshaunda?
Go ahead, Reshaunda. I'll wrap it up.
Can't hear you. I can't hear her.
Reshaunda, we can't hear you.
You did.
Because I have you on mute. What I was saying is that there is this post that was sent to me, and to me it just wraps it all up, and it just to me kind of clarifies some things. So I'm just going to read it and just let people kind of take it in. It says, "It really took a global pandemic with no sports, no concerts, no vacations to get the world to sit down and have no choice but to watch what's really happening to Black people in America with no distractions." And just think, how would this have happened if we were still preoccupied, if we still had so many different whistles and bells floating around us? I mean, it just kind of came at the right time. And I think now people are, we have the word woke, and there's different levels of wokeness. But I feel like communities that have not been in that term are starting to. And to me that shows something different than what has been in the past. And so my hope is that we don't just take this moment and create a paragraph in the history book, but we actually take this moment and shift it and move it and drive it to where we don't have to revisit these things, or our children don't have to revisit these things in their lives. So that's my hope. That's my final take.
I'll wrap up with two things that Jesus said really quick. Jesus said in one text in Matthew, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." And then Jesus comes back later on in that text and says, "I did not come to bring peace, but a sword." And so I want to say this for those that are saying, we need peace. Let's let these protesters, our protests should be peaceful. Protest in its very definite definition means to disrupt. So we don't come peacefully. We come to disrupt. We're not coming to loot. We're not coming to steal. That's a whole nother group of people with a whole different agenda. But peace will happen when we have equity, not just equality, but equity, which means I'm looking for reparations for our people, because as I said earlier, these gaps will never be closed. And so there has to be some reparation. If we truly want to see a level playing ground, we've got to have something so that we can really kind of help to kind of close those disparities. So we'll see peace when we see equity and realize that this is never about being peaceful, but it's about disrupting a system that needs to be changed. Thanks, Danny.
Yeah, no, I appreciate all of you just sharing that. And as Noah said, for the four of you and of people of color and Noah, but like for the four of you of like walking alongside me in different levels of friendship and just your grace in my ignorance, I appreciate you guys for that. And Noah, I think just being a good friend and mentor, I've appreciated you, and thank you guys for being in this conversation.
Thank you.
And Hakeem, do you have one more thing before we leave? I can't tell if you're about to throw some. Okay.
Oh, no. So thank you.
So hey, Aaron, would you pray us out? We don't always pray out, but I would just love to close us in prayer, just because I feel like this has been a holy ground and holy conversation. So
I'd love to. Heavenly Father, Jesus, I am reminded, as my sister Kelly said earlier, where she said that we ought to love our neighbor as ourselves. And Lord, when I think of these social issues, Lord, these social sins towards one another, Lord, I feel like it is a simple failure to not love our neighbor as ourselves, Lord. And you showed us, Lord, in the parable of the Good Samaritan, who our neighbor is. Our neighbor is those who are near and or those who are in need, Lord. And so, Father, Lord, that we would live our lives that way. That, Lord, what we would want for ourselves or our own children, Lord, or our loved ones is what we would give, Lord. And Father, if that is to be an advocate, Lord, if that's to be a co-conspirator, Lord. Father, in 1 Corinthians 12:25, it says that if one of us suffers, that we all suffer together with them, Lord. And Lord, for minorities in America, Lord, and around the world, Lord, and within the body of Christ, Lord, it is about suffering well with our brothers and sisters, Lord. And so, Father, Lord, let us see, Lord, that this is an extension, Lord, of just kingdom living, Lord, that the gospel has implications, Lord, and responsibilities tied to it, Lord, that we should live a certain way. And Lord, as in the final judgment in Matthew 25:31 through 41, Lord, when you come back and the sheep are on your right and the goats are on the left, Lord, it's amazing the things that you bring to mind. You say, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was cold, you covered me. Lord, all these things, these social things, Lord, that should be in our heart for one another. And so, Lord, where every person is, wherever they are on their journey, Holy Spirit, I pray that you would just move them forward. I pray that they would be courageous, Lord, but I pray that you would open things up, Lord, to all of us that maybe we've never seen before. And that, Lord, the body of Christ would work towards a deeper unity. But, Lord, that we would simply be salt and light. Father, I feel like for the church, this is, Father, Lord, opportunities for being salt and light, that the church would lead out in this, Lord, and finally get it right. So, Father, Lord, thank you for what you're doing in the hearts and minds of people all over the country and all over the world. Let it be genuine. Let them stay in. Give them endurance, Lord, and let us all be courageous, Lord God. And Father, Lord, and just walk out the kingdom here on earth, Lord, until you come back. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 Well, friends, for the five of you, I appreciate you just being on with me, and for everyone that stuck around and watched with us, we appreciate you joining in and just being a part of the conversation. We'll be back next week for Hot Thoughts, and I appreciate these five for joining the conversation. So we'll see you guys around next week.
Sounds good.
Appreciate you, Danny.
Thank you.